Cliffhangers. Short stories to stimulate the imagination.
We gathered at the busy dock. The four of us huddled together at the end of the brew house. Around us were dozens of ale barrels. Some empty, some full, but all smelled of stale brew. We all sat down on the wooden dock, stained with years of foot traffic and spilled ale. Mary had in her hand a small cloth drawstring bag. She looked around, taking in all our faces, and slowly opened it. Taking it slow like it was forbidden fruit that we all desperately wanted. She first took out a piece of cloth from the bag and carefully laid it out on the floor where we all looked on in anticipation. She reached inside again, her hand emerged with a small collection of pig's knuckle bones and a small black ball. She dropped them down on the cloth so they spilled randomly on the playing field. She turned to us all and with a look of glee, said, "So boys, are you ready to get beaten at knuckles again?" We all joined in with hoots and howls of delight and ridicule. We had never beaten Mary at knuckles, but we all believed we could. The knuckles were well worn and had been used many hundreds of times. They were responsible for uncounted hours of wasted time. Mary had certainly more hours under her belt and was a far better player than the rest of us. As we sat, sailors moved around us in hurried patterns. People getting supplies ready and boarding ships, and people taking a break and enjoying an ale at the brew house. There was also a lot of people enjoying far too many ales as well. There was a fight at least once every day in this place and the owner often had to throw someone out. I think he enjoyed this part of his job the most. He would physically throw people off the dock and into the water. Most of them sobered up pretty quick after that. Mary was one of the few girls on the dock that day. During the day it was mostly men drinking, and the odd serving girl tending to tables. As we ready to play the first game, James the old sailor walked up and took a knee in front of us. He looked stern and well worn. He was not that old, probably only in his 30s, but for a sailor in the 1700s that seemed old. Death came early for sailors in those days. Even if you were on one of the big ships owned by big companies, it was no warrant of safety. I only knew James in passing. Thomas knew the sailor the best and asked him if he had caught any whales while he was away. James looked the boy up and down and with what seemed like a sadness said he had not. "That was a life for fit and able men. I only sail for the spice trade since I lost my foot to the blasted beast," he said. Mary, the only girl of the group, jumped up and said she did not believe his story. James reached down to his boot and twisted it off his stump. Where his ankle should have been, his leg ended in an angry red stump. At first she looked horrified, but then she wanted to hear the story of how he lost his foot. He gave Mary a coin and told her to get him a drink and she would get her story. As Mary ran off, coin in hand, James stood and moved an old barrel closer to where we all played and sat on it. He reached down and proceeded to massage his stump, while groaning in what I assume was both pleasure and pain. The stump was red and looked very painful. Mary returned holding the tankard of ale very carefully so that it didn't spill. James took his dirty leather tricorn from his head and pulled a small package from the band inside. He poured the contents into his ale and took a large slug on it. He let out a large sigh and plonked the mug down on the next barrel. He cleared his throat and told his story.
"Good work, girl. Now sit yourself down and take heed of my tale. Our ship had been out at sea for only about 3 weeks. We had made some good finds and caught a mighty whale every few days. We had all of the carcass in tow, waiting for the other ship to come and take them back to the station. We had just settled in for some food when the man in the nest yelled that he spotted a spout to starboard. We all rushed up on deck and took our positions. Me and 3 others were the spearmen. We lined up on the side of the ship and watched for another spot or break in the surface of the water to let us know where the whale was. "Thar she blows," rang out from the men at the back. We swung round to see the beast breach. It was getting on to dusk, so it was a little hard to see too far out from the ship. We tried to keep up with the whale and drew close to it each time it surfaced. We got close enough that the man in front of me threw his spear. He missed his target as it dropped back beneath the surface and disappeared. We stood and watched the water as he reeled in his spear and got ready to go again. With the ship rolling in the wind and choppy waters, I staggered to the side a few steps and tripped on his spear line that was now just a mess of ropes on the deck. Someone spotted a whale breach on the starboard side, the others ran to the other deck rail to see where the whale was, ready to throw the harpoons again. As I struggled to my feet, they all released the weapons, and the whale tried to dive. I watched in horror as the rope around my ankle started to race over the side of the boat. I dropped my harpoon and grabbed at the rope as it sped away. The harpoon men cheered as the spears hit the mark. The whale started to dive and the rope slid across the deck faster than I could untangle it. The rope snapped taut against my leg and dragged me across the deck to the edge. My foot stopped hard against the deck rail. I was just about to be pulled over the edge when two fellow sailors ran towards me, one carrying an axe.
I hope you enjoyed this 5-minute short story from Hot Dog Telepathy. This is where this story ends. If you have an idea for the next 5-minute story, add it to the comments and it may just become the next Hot Dog Telepathy cliffhanger.